Namaste, welcome, and thank you for joining the Project Bharat podcast. I'm very excited today to have with us Kiran. Hi, Kiran. Uh, uh,
Hello.
Kiran is Kiran is a professor of computing science in Germany, and I know him as Vakibs on Twitter, where he is, to me, an expert to follow on matters of Indian history, Bharat, Dharma, native languages. And so I had a lot of things I wanted to discuss with him, and therefore we are here today. Yeah, hi Kiran. And
Yeah,
so
thanks for
Please,
inviting
sorry.
me. I'm excited to be here.
I wanted to start with getting a sense for your journey and your engagement with Dharma. And I asked this as a person who was extremely deracinated, who was one of those colonized people, and only in recent years I am on a journey of my own. So, how have you been engaged with Dharma, with history? Has it always been a part of you, or you also had your own seeking? Could you give us a sense?
Well, I would say that I'm not really an expert in dharma or anything. I am just I would say a regular person and a curious person who would like to know more about my own heritage and my own
Yeah.
culture. But it is not a very conscious effort what I did to discover things. It's just actually a way of um, realizing in a common sense way, okay, what I am and what type of
Mm,
things I like, and what is my perspective about things in life. What in German they call Weltanschau, right? What the thing, how
okay.
you look at the world. So
Mm,
this obviously came about also because I lived a long time abroad. So I spent about 10 years, 12 years now, I think, in Europe, half time in France, half the time in Germany, and speaking regularly either in French or in German.
mm,
So when you are actually immersed in a foreign culture and in a different setting, you also think a little bit about, like, what makes you different, and what is the kind of things that what makes you take some types of decisions in such a way,
right,
in
right.
a manner, because it is like a background process called culture that is running in our consciousness, right? And so slowly I tried to formulate these things, and I'm still trying,
Mhm,
like, to
mhm,
understand what would be my background and so on. So I would say that so in Telugu, like my language, dharmam or dharma
mhm.
would be more correctly translated as ethics, or
Okay.
uh, what is the right or the just way of behaving. It's not
Mhm,
just about religion or about customs or rituals. Or it encompasses a lot, all of these things, but at its core, it's about the just way of living and an ethical way of living in the world, right? So
mhm.
you cannot say that you don't have it. Everybody has that. We
Sure.
all have it, and maybe consciously or subconsciously, we have these values, and each person might have a slightly different way of these values. And because we are Indians and we are born in a very old and ancient civilization where these things have been discussed a long time, encoded in our stories, our art forms, and all that music. So we have it in the background, in the culture,
Mhm,
right? So in the same way, I grew up in a very quiet small village area in Andhra Pradesh, in the Godavari River area, and still have that background in my head even
Ji.
after I
Yeah.
traveled along a lot of countries, and because it's the way how you grow up, right? And I would say that I don't even have actually any religious upbringing. In fact, my
Mhm.
family was very irreligious.
Right,
So I
right, right.
didn't have any type of religious upbringing, and but I do have all our rituals, customs, festivals, all happening around me as a child, and I also
Mhm.
enjoyed all these things. So you don't have to be specifically religious. If you're just a curious person and if you live through your life in India, you would ultimately be part of dharma, and you would be a product of dharma, right?
Ji. Mhm,
Yeah, so that is how I started. And I started reading a little bit about Indian philosophy and a
Mm.
little bit about Indian culture, maybe in my bachelor's, like
Okay.
during my university days. And it started out as a very annoying kind of a starting thing. A friend of mine, like not a very great friend, but a classmate during my intermediate. So it's just before I
Mhm.
joined university, right? So he spread a rumor that Kiran actually is an atheist because
Okay.
he had poor grades in the exams, and at some
Mm.
point stopped believing in
Okay.
God. He had poor grades, and this was some kind of a rumor that was going on. I had no idea. So I was, I just didn't care about religion. And I think
Mhm.
maybe at some point he asked me, okay, what do you, what do you think about this? I said, no, I don't care about this. I'm just, I'm interested in other stuff. And this rumor
Sure.
was spread. And I was like really annoyed because firstly, I never had poor grades.
And that's the important stuff first, yeah.
Secondly,
Right.
right, why would you stop believing in God if you just have poor grades? It's just
All
like
great.
the dumbest thing to do, right? But apparently, that is how he made sense of the situation.
Sure,
So
sure.
I said that is rubbish. So I just wanted to answer this in a more precise way. So I wanted to answer, okay, what exactly is this thing? What,
Mm.
God or religion or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to precisely know what that is, and then I can maybe reflect on it, and then I would
Correct.
answer what I actually think about it, right? Because I just until then I didn't care. So
Right.
because of this prompting, I would say
Mm.
I started to, okay, I might actually go and read some books.
Read, yeah. And you would read in Telugu or you would read in English or
Actually, at that point in my university, I did my schooling and also my university. Everything was in English. So schooling
okay.
was in the English, but I was reading a lot in Telugu during my school days
Mm.
because
Mm.
a lot of books. And university, in fact, it was very hectic, and I just also didn't have access to a lot of Telugu books in the library. So I was just picking up whatever is there. And in fact, it was Radhakrishnan's Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan's Introduction to Indian Philosophy or some book like that.
Okay.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
specifically remember. It was a long time ago. And then I first in the first time I would say I just understood, okay, what is monotheism, polytheism, atheism, and
Sure, sure.
monism. So Radhakrishnan has a very gentle way of introducing these things, and he said, okay, what is Advaita, what is Vishishta Advaita, and what were the belief systems of the Buddhists. So I kind of went through this thing. I kind of knew these things already beforehand, right? Because I knew from other books or storybooks or whatever. But it's just like a little bit of a formal introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had an answer, right? Okay, I would say, okay, what
Mm.
I have.
Mm.
I think at
Okay.
that point I kind of made up my mind that I would. I'm a little bit more on the Nyaya Darshana point of view, where I would like
Okay.
to rigorously analyze things. I don't
Mm.
categorically rule out anything, but I would only
Sure.
accept any premise until the point when it is proved or something like that, with
Mm-hmm.
some evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be like a reasonable answer, but more
Mm.
grounded? I had that
Correct.
answer, so I stopped it. So I said, okay, fine. If anybody asks me, I would answer in a more elaborate manner, and then
Mm-hmm.
not
Sure.
spread any dumb rumors, right? So
And go correct them about my marks also.
March, yeah. Anyway, so this was after I graduated of school. Like that happened already in school. So I just remembered
Great.
this incident, and I was annoyed that, okay, this I don't want to repeat more often.
Mm-hmm.
If ever I get into a discussion about rituals or religion or whatever, because my upbringing was very irreligious. So I was not going to a temple or anything. So people
Mm-hmm.
might ask me. By the way, this
Mm. Okay.
this friend of mine who spread the rumor was a Muslim. He was
Huh.
not even Hindu.
Okay.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. So he
Huh.
was this. Uh, so I just wanted to have some basic way of answering people and
Mm-hmm.
going about my business essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
that was about it. And at the end of my bachelor's, I went to the United States as an exchange student. And at the airport, um, I actually found some bookstore. So I said, okay, I have some space in my baggage, so I can buy a book. And there I bought a book from Radhakrishnan again, like the 18 Principal Upanishads. So this book
Okay.
I
Okay.
got first
Yeah.
time when I was going out of India to United States when I think I was 20, just graduated around that time. So this book actually still have it, and I keep reading it, and it's really very nice.
Mm-hmm.
It has the Sanskrit text, the translation in
Mm-hmm.
English, and then some introductory material. So I read a couple of these essays, and maybe some of the Upanishads I read a little bit. Yeah, because I was very fascinated with what the discussion was going on. But then, not like rigorously the whole thing. I just like, flipped through that thing, I would say. Um, so that is about it. I didn't have any further formal training in Dharma or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I used to read a lot about a lot of stories. Also, as a kid, I was reading a lot of stories. So I pretty much knew like the entire story of the Ramayana and the Mahābhārata and the mini stories from the Bhagavatam. All these
Mm-hmm.
would be like just there and in the books, right? So I would just know all these things. Also, the Telugu film industry is also like very brilliant with using this material.
Ji, ji.
So I would say my background is more rooted in culture and a little bit of introduction formally.
Mm-hmm.
But so when I interpret anything, I would just give us common sense opinion, not like a expert opinion or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
uh, I think maybe around end of my PhD or around that time during my PhD when I was in France, I might have first in the like self-consciously trying to express okay what it is that is unique about my
Mm-hmm.
way of looking at things, which is because
Ji.
not exactly like everybody else, and especially not like in a foreign country. I do think I'm partly French because I lived there for 6 years, and I appreciate a lot of stuff. So I kind of have that still in me, right? But there will be definite differences, like how I would look at things and what others would look at things. So I try to understand like what was going on, and this was when maybe I got a little bit mature with
Mm-hmm.
identifying what are the values and why is it so. And there it's very clear that we have this system of purusharthas, and even if you don't you don't care about religion or anything, you would
Ji. Yeah.
have this in the background. So you cannot
Yes.
you cannot just rule out dharma because that is
Right.
the central ethical framework. So
Correct.
and yeah, you have to express this and understand like what is it that is value, what is it
Mm-hmm.
that uh, something that needs to be preserved, something that needs to be defended, um, like friendships, family,
Mm-hmm.
nature, values, whatever you care about, like also the heritage, ancestors. So this
Ji.
is all dharma. This is basically the thing. And the sampradayas, what we have, different sampradayas from Vaishnava or Shaiva or Bauddha or many different sampradayas, they
Mm-hmm.
all are a way of bolstering our identity and consciousness, so that we better cater to our duties, what we have to do for dharma.
Ji.
So I yeah, I would say that I am at that very core sense of identity where you identify that dharma is a value that is very important, and I don't want to give it to the judgment or uh, supervision of the Western liberal media or whoever who
Mm-hmm.
define
Mm-hmm.
it, because it's my values. Who are they to define them and
Yes, yes, yeah.
adjudicate on them, right? So, and I disagree with a lot of what they say and what they value, right? So essentially, this is our sense of civilizational identity, and it's
Mm-hmm.
different. Our civilization has values which are definitely very well grounded and are
Ji.
different from other civilizations, and they are also good. The other civilizations are also great, but we should understand like where our sense of identity comes from, and what are the things that we value. And here we have a great heritage, right? So we have so many sampradayas, living traditions. We have so much of culture. We have like a huge trove of literature, and yeah, when somebody is
In many
interested
languages, yeah. Yeah.
in many great languages, yeah.
Yeah.
So if anybody is interested in Dharma, I would just say just read stories, man.
Correct.
So first thing would be so for me, like the best introduction would be Kalidas. So
Okay.
I didn't formally study Sanskrit. Had like a couple of years like in the school, like very minimal. Sanskrit was just given as a subject because it's easy to score marks. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's not at all
Yeah.
well taught or
Correct.
anything. But our teacher was good, but it was not like a rigorous thing, just for a couple
Mm-hmm.
of years. But Telugu is a very Sanskrit friendly language, so you don't
Ji.
really need a lot of extra input. You can still follow a lot. So I actually, just after my school days, before I went to the university, I went to the local library in Kakinada. I looked up like what are the books that are there, because I finished everything in my small village,
Oh
and
wow. Okay. Wow.
and in my parents whatever they
Mm.
had. And I used to get like books for as prizes for school days, right? I finished everything, so
Okay.
I went to the library,
Yeah.
and there I borrowed the an anthology of poems from Kalidas. And this is a
Okay.
brilliant thing, like small poems, not like the big ones like Kumara Sambhavam or whatever, but Rutu Samharam and Shrindara Tilakam, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so these are like Meghadutam was also there. So these were
Okay.
poems in Sanskrit with Pratipadardham, like each word explained, not in Telugu, and then translation into English. So this
Mm-hmm.
I read when I was maybe 16, and
Oh, wow.
that would be like the best grounding. I would say my sense of dharma comes from there, and
Wow. Okay.
I would say that this is this type of stories, Panchatantra, obviously, and so I keep referring to like our great poets and writers. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so not a lot about philosophers, and my knowledge is limited there. I'm trying to read more. I am also like curious, and I would like to learn more. But yeah, my I would say the background process that is running in my mind would be
Mm-hmm.
molded by our great story tradition in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is like the gentlest way to introduce Indian culture to anybody, I think. Um,
Yeah.
not not necessarily essays. So at some point, like in the last 4 or 5 years,
Mm.
I got to I would say maybe even 6 years or so, like in the recent past, like in the 6 7 years ago, I realized that I actually have very strong opinions about ethics in technology,
Mm.
in
Okay.
computer science, in
Okay. Okay.
AI, and it was also like a formative time because I had to pick a job. I had to decide what I wanted to do, and then I was already very yeah, uncertain with the general trends of where people are working, and then the Snowden revelations happened
Mm.
around,
Mm-hmm.
and this was really like another, yeah, complete turn off for
Mm.
what's happening. So essentially this opinions about technology and ethics got very strong I still have them, like really very strong opinions. Had a formative period around 6 7 years, and around that time again, I had to go back to my native sense of identity and Weltanschauung, like what are the value systems what I have. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I started trying to interpret, like, okay, what are these opinions that I have about ethics in technology? How can I formulate that through my own philosophical orientation? And then I
Right.
started writing essays which are a bit more, I would say, a little bit more grounded in Dharma. I
Mm.
had to also refer to. So I'm a trained scientist, so I try to give references. So I had to also
Right.
refer to certain books and so on. So then I started reading a little bit more like philosophers and maybe essayists. I did read a little bit from the great yeah, the writers like Radhakrishnan, obviously, but also um, Aurobindo a little bit, not too
Great.
much. Unfortunately, I didn't read. Yeah, uh, didn't read too much. So yeah, this is slowly trying to give references to, okay, what are these people saying, and how do I
Mhm.
agree or disagree to them. Um, and also it's nice when when we have a scholarly tradition, they would say, okay, it's not just my idea. I
Mhm.
kind of refer to this great philosopher, that could be Ramanuja or Shankara or Buddha, anybody, and would argue. So we should build on our native scholarly tradition like that, and also give our opinions like about
Indeed.
any concurrent topic. So this is an ongoing journey, and I still am trying to learn like what would be the routing in
Mhm.
these topics.
Yeah. Great. I mean, you touched upon so many interesting things already. What I noted, I think was interesting. Number one, that you never had that question in yourself that am I atheist? Am I this, that? That wasn't something in your sphere unless someone asked you or unless it was brought up through other forces. And then also, your first instinct was to go search, to go look up, to go find out what the case is. And then
Yeah,
what you came back with was still it was nyay, and you talked about something called nyay, which is very characteristic actually of our circumstance itself, right? That we don't need to be classifying, is Hinduism atheistic, is Hinduism polytheistic, is Hinduism henotheistic, this, that.
yeah,
It's entirely different. And what I want to ask you is that I started thinking that actually the best word, if you want to use one of these words, is that Hinduism or Dharma, it's trans-theistic, by which I mean it transcends the theism question. It is about other things and things beyond just that conception. So, what would you think about that?
yeah. I totally agree with you, and also I keep asking people when they talk about God or atheist or
Hmm.
theist, because that's not at all a relevant question for us as
Yeah,
Indians
yeah,
because of our
yeah,
intellectual tradition. So
correct.
the questions that are interesting for us is, who am I? Okay,
Hmm.
what do I see? What is my goal in life, and what
Yeah,
is this universe, what is this existence? So these are questions that are interesting. Okay, so
correct.
these make more sense, and then we can say, okay, what is our opinion on these things? So
Hmm.
my since my background and my growing up was also like, I didn't specifically have any religious upbringing. I
Hmm.
never thought that the question of God was important, and now I see
Indeed.
that it's very useful and very
Mhm.
brilliant, and there is also a lot of rich imagery and philosophical symbolism, and a lot of living traditions here, right?
Mhm.
So, but I don't want to ground Indian thought and
Correct.
Hindu
Yeah,
thought on this
against
question
that.
because it's completely irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Yeah.
What would be a good question would be, who am I? And
Hmm.
what is my relation to this world? Then we
Yeah,
can ask,
yeah.
we can start, and we will have a wide range of opinions on this thing, and we might have one topic, one personality might argue very very strongly on something, right? And the other
Hmm.
might just equally strongly argue on something else, and you may not even be asked to decide. You might take your sweet time. You might
Hmm.
entertain all these multiple debates. You will just enjoy this whole thing.
Correct.
You
Correct.
you
Yeah.
savor the rasa of this whole activity, and at some point,
Correct. Yeah.
maybe you will make a decision. Like for me, what I think is really annoying is when people ask for branding, right? So they say it's like branding. Like if you say you're
Hmm.
an atheist, why would
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
put this thing on my head? So
Correct.
a cap.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the hell that is, right? So
Exactly. It's branding as a response to a question someone else cares about. So yeah.
yeah, and do they even really realize what that question was? Because
Hmm.
I I am so I got a kind of a very chilled out, relaxed upbringing, and when somebody wants to brand you and put you into a box,
Hmm.
it would be just the fact that somebody's
Yeah.
trying to put you in a box would be very annoying, right? But
Correct.
then on
Correct.
top
Yeah.
of that, like if you have to defend why that box is you, that is just
Hmm.
even more annoying. So I would rather choose my box, and I would rather argue on my own language. So this is where I
Absolutely.
uh, yeah I also had the luxury of taking my time. I didn't have people attacking me violently or whatever, right? So then you really have to choose very quickly. But if you have the luxury of
Correct.
reflecting, reading, appreciating
Mm-hmm.
many things and different cultures, and then you can choose what you are, and, what the things that you like, and they can also evolve over time, but they will never go
Mm-hmm.
away, like the values that you have. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So, my own journey has been primarily through actually history. It is through my curiosity for history, especially ancient history, especially in ancient Indian history. The first, relevant in this regard, I'd read the Bhagavad Mahapuran many years ago. And that was my first experience with the fact that, oh, wow, we have these amazing genealogies. We have so many stories, as you said, I mean, stories of so many kings, so many rishis, divisions of time, starting from something fractional to, of course, 8.2 billion years. And I was amazed that how is it possible? Then I think I was by then maybe 16, 17 years old. And how is it possible that I'm an Indian? I've been brought up Indian. I've been told, oh, my culture, my country is so great. But I didn't know this. And it is now through my own curiosity that I engage with this kind of text. So history has been my kind of, ropeway to
I see.
whatever now engagement I have. And therefore, I have now, so this is what I wanted to then uh, get from you next. The way I've started to think about it is, so for example, Professor Bala Gangadhar, his work on history, on culture itself. And so he talks about how history is simply a people's story of their own past. And we can kind of look at it in that way. Then we have professors Atluri and Bagchi, who talk about history being something that transcends historicism,
uh,
right? So it has a self-reflective aspect to it,
mhm.
which is then when we can go into Itihāsa. So therefore, the way I started thinking of this was that what consciousness is in an individual, that is actually what civilization is to a group effort. So in individual, information processing at highly complex levels creates conscious experience, the felt experience of being. So civilization is the felt experience of being of a people, and consciousness rests on memory, right? So it's an unbroken continuum of memory creates that consciousness. So that is what history is to a civilization. So it is a
Right.
self-reflective story of our own past, which is
Yes.
then Itihāsa. So how do you think of Indian history? Is To what degree does it interest you, or you engage with it uh, in general?
Yeah, it is very central for culture and
Mhm.
civilization, because um, we have a very long sense of values, and these
Mhm.
values are also self-reflected. So a lot of debate has gone through this, and the ideas have been refined, and they have been bounced around. And I would say that we are a people who actually entertain, not just uh, like straight line following according to some kind of a predefined set of instructions. We don't live our life through that. Like, it's not like a
Mhm.
uh, going along a set of instructions, and then you end to
Ji.
the you finish your life and you're done, right? It's not like that. We are more of a curious and exploratory kind of people, and we entertain this samvadam, so samvada between different viewpoints. So even in our own mind, when we just close our eyes, we have different viewpoints which are talking to each other, and we have this
Absolutely.
way of debate. And this debate is also in all directions, not just in one axis, in many axes. So if you want to really draw the full essence of this whole rich debate and values,
Mhm.
you have to have a sense of history, because there have been debates going on. They have been
Yeah.
encoded in our civilization, in our culture, in our art forms, stories, and also in our yeah the historical happenings of what happened.
Mhm.
They fought for their these values. So
Yeah.
this is very obviously very important, and anybody would find that important. What is curiously peculiar to India, uh, maybe in a limited sense also to other colonized countries, but definitely to India,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
we have violently assaulted. Our sense of
Yes.
self-reflection, our sense of history has been very violently assaulted during the British period. It was a little bit assaulted during the Turkish colonial period, but was peculiar. And the reason why it was so violently assaulted was because without doing that, the British couldn't have ruled us.
Yes.
They just look at that, right? Britain is a very tiny island, not even central to Europe. It was basically like an offshore. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's not at all central to the happenings of the world, but it routed the entire commerce through their headquarters, and it routed the entire academic discourse also through their headquarters, and tried to warp a kind of a new cosmos in which everybody else would live. So that was
Mm-hmm.
necessary. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to rule over a country and a civilization like India. So they were very conscious of this. And the moment the 1857 revolt happened,
Yeah.
where they really tried to throw away the British, there they had the real shock. So because if they don't brainwash us, they cannot rule us. So
Mm-hmm.
then, because of this, actually, there was a significant distortion of our sense of history, and we are still suffering through that. And
Yeah.
it won't be done in, I would say, one generation. We have to
No.
really critically examine what happened during the colonial period, and also critically read all the texts that were written during this period.
Yeah.
Also read our own texts and our own literature, and we need to bring our literature to the central
Mm-hmm.
core. We are a very scholarly tradition, so we have a
Yes.
giant trove of literature. So that
Correct.
has to
Yeah.
be the basis around which our history would be
Yeah.
written.
Mm-hmm.
In what the British tried to do is actually they tried to discard this whole thing in just one fell swoop. They said
Mm-hmm.
Indians don't have a sense of history, and
Yeah.
all the literature they have is just rubbish. So you cannot just trust any of that. It's just rubbish.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's just it's not just unfair. It is it's a violence. It's really like a very horrific violence on our sense of history and our identity.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
what they then tried to do is that they said, okay, we will not just we'll just put it all aside. We will start from scratch, and we will say that is our scientific rational way of history, which is
Mm-hmm.
already bullshit. But what they
Mm-hmm.
said was that they would do that in an objective manner. An objective means
Yeah.
they would basically shut our mouths and
Mm.
ignore whatever we say, and then poke our bodies and cut our
Correct. Yeah.
fingers and whatever. And then
Absolutely.
due to this dissection, they would identify what is it's like a physics experiment. We are a passive inert
Absolutely.
body,
Yeah.
and they would do these things. And this is why they just reduced our culture and our civilization to anthropology
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
archaeology, right? And even there, right, it was done by a colonial vested interest which had uh, a long history of distorting things. Europe
Mm.
itself had a very crooked academic tradition. They were distorting things all the time. So they
Mm-hmm.
basically they don't have, for example, Satyameva Jayate, what we have in our motto in our system.
Yeah.
They don't have any such value about truth, right? They don't care.
Mm.
So their values are different. So they basically were running the show on how to examine evidence in
Mm.
archaeology, in any other inert objects what we get, and they distorted even that. So if you just look at that, just ignore our literature. If you just look at our
Mm.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
material artifacts and what the story they say, it's very clear. We have a
Mm.
very long giant civilization and a very long
Absolutely.
history, and it's very continuous. There is no break.
Yes.
But they couldn't accept that, right? So the British couldn't accept that, so they violently assaulted it. So we are a living we are basically like facing echoes of all this violence, because we
Mm.
have the religious divide what we have in the country, where a set of people are brainwashed into thinking that don't form part of the Indian civilization.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot look back beyond a specific point in
Yeah.
time,
Correct. Correct.
and
That's not
they
their
don't,
memory. It's
yeah,
to
they
them.
don't have
That's yeah. Yeah.
any longer ancestral memory beyond that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And that could be very recent for a new convert, but it doesn't matter. It could
Mm-hmm.
be going a bit further, but it's broken. And then you have the language divide, which is even worse.
Mm.
This is like the worst ridiculous bullshit racist theories, which somehow trickle down into academia and our politics and not being challenged, like
Yeah,
the Dravidian divide, which is just complete rubbish, right? How they
absolutely.
built up this whole theory based on supposed racial divide in India. And so I come from, it's precisely the point where the divide, the frontiers happen, right?
Yeah.
And it just wreaked havoc in the culture and in the politics. So
Correct.
this thing, we cannot just ignore it. This history is obviously, we have a long agenda to kind of fix it.
Yep.
Uh, but I didn't realize how pathetic and how terrible our situation is until very recently. Honestly,
Mm.
I didn't think this question was that important. I thought the
Okay.
questions about epistemology and philosophy and
Sure.
ethics,
Yeah.
these are more important. But then now I realize actually that the realization that the British really messed up our scholarly tradition.
Sense of
uh,
self, and yeah.
it probably came to me in the last 3-4 years, and
Mm.
once you get this realization, then you cannot just ignore it.
Yes.
So
Yes. Correct. Yeah. Then I mean, it now is a part of you for everything that you look at,
yeah,
how you perceive.
and you
Yeah.
have, once you reflect on this thing, right, you know also how to argue back. You know how to
Correct.
argue
Yeah.
with your own compatriots, your own people of your own civilization. You also know how to
Mm.
express yourself to other civilizations, because
Correct.
the background and the categorization, the vocabulary that is used to discuss India, it is not
Hmm.
from our own choice. It is basically the British who created this vocabulary. To some extent, also other
Yeah.
Europeans, but essentially the
Hmm.
colonial racist period. And this is unfair, and it cannot be tolerated in this day and age.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
once you kind of ground your arguments based on this, it's also easier to explain to other people. Like a standard question, for example, that I always get, like when I meet other
Mm.
friends or other people in a social setting in Europe, they would just ask, they're curious, they're friendly curious. Nobody
Hmm.
is you know has set opinions or is violently opposed to our other civilizations or anything like that, but they're friendly curious, but their thinking process is rooted in a small set of concepts: caste system, for example, and then maybe violence against women or whatever, and
Mm.
um,
Cow,
some
maybe.
other small, whatever rubbish is coming up in the current news cycle. But essentially a very tiny set about India. India doesn't come across in the school syllabus in any European country, right? It's just they
Hmm.
don't care.
Hmm.
even even in university discussions or even in Indology departments, it's really like very tiny set, which is basically defining the whole discourse. So
Yeah.
when I meet other people in a social context, they ask questions like, okay, what do you think about the caste system? How does it work in
Mm.
India? Oh, arranged marriage, how does it happen?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's like you have to answer these questions. It's not like you cannot.
Sure. Yeah.
You say, I just
Yeah.
don't
As you
care.
said, it's just socially curious questions. So
Yeah,
anyway, you have to kind of discuss
yeah.
them in general. And yeah.
So if you actually have a good sense of history and a good sense of understanding of the colonial framing of history, then you can also have a better conversation with other civilizations and
Absolutely.
find counterparts which are actually more interesting. So and I think when we really start discussing about values, civilizational values, what
Hmm.
we value in nature, what we value in culture, what we value in families, for example, uh, and other things, what we really care about. Once we get the discussion to that point, then we are
Correct.
in a good position. So we don't
Home
have,
ground. Yeah.
yeah. So Indians, we are not accepted. So we are still
Mm.
treated in that anthropological
Yes.
spectacle.
Yes.
So
Curiosity. Yeah.
they don't consider us to have anything of worth or anything of intellectual input in this debate.
Hmm.
This all would be decided by the high seat in some academic setting in the West or
Yeah.
wherever. But that is absurd. I mean, that is just rubbish, and also completely absurd considering that we have a continuous living civilization in India, right? And it 1/5 of humanity also has a lot of answers for a lot of the serious questions
Mm.
that we face now,
Yeah.
right? Ecology or ethics, digitalization, what is the sense of
Mm.
identity, and all these things. So we have our own way of looking at these things. So at some
Yeah.
point we have to get to that, and we cannot avoid history. So history has to be refined and reinterpreted, and the goal should be that we get the seat at the table there, to where we discuss
Mhm.
these things and
Mhm.
present our point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, to take it a step deeper, so for example, let's just talk about the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, we know that tradition looks at them as Itihāsa. And okay, today we say that, yes, this is our true history. So, what is the way to unpack that? So, is it that we should be thinking, or what we should be propagating is that, look, the Mahabharata is an account of real events. What is real, how real, that would be the technicality, but it is fundamentally a true event. That's level one. And level two, how much should we care? Okay, when did the event happen? Was it 1900 BC? Was it 3000 BC? So, to what degree are these the questions to be pursuing, and why, or if not? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. I hope I will give a reasonable answer to this. Um, I would, to start with, I would just compare our literature, our
Hmm.
sense of Itihāsa and Purana and all that, to other civilizations which are comparable, like comparably long, like Greece,
Hmm.
Egypt,
Hmm.
Iran,
Hmm.
China.
Hmm.
Let's look at comparable literature around that time, what they had. Is it
Ji.
so sanitized and devoid of mythic symbolism,
Hmm. Hmm.
devoid of magic, devoid of moral values? Is it always that? Rubbish.
Hmm.
No civilization has that. Every civilization,
Hmm.
makes it more interesting so that these things would be remembered properly, right? So every culture has these things. So
Yeah.
the Greeks have, for example, the Trojan War, and the Trojan War is written in two great epics, Iliad and Odyssey. Iliad already has a lot of elements of magic, but Odyssey, come on, like the
Hmm.
Ulysses, story of Ulysses, right? I mean,
Fantasy. Yeah.
how does Ramayana compare with that, right? It would, I would say
Hmm.
it's Ramayana is a lot more naturalistic in its
Yeah.
form.
Yeah. 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 Hmm.
So we should just first, uh, question this British bullshit. Why India specifically has been isolated, as if we don't have a sense of history or sense of
Hmm.
objectivity. Rubbish. Nobody else also, was doing it like this, and we were a lot more rigorous. So we had many interesting things in India which are absent in other cultures. Like, for example, we have cross-referencing. So the same
Hmm.
story will be repeated in many other myths and many other
Yes.
books. So we know it's just not like one single thing. We cannot just it cannot be destroyed just by rubbishing one single
Correct.
book or one single
Hmm.
event or story, because the same thing would be repeated in many sampradayas, many
Ji.
stories, many books.
Hmm.
So it's what gives like heft and
Yeah.
scholarly heft for our
Hmm.
literature. Right?
Hmm.
So that is one. Many civilizations just don't have it.
Yes.
Even great
Absolutely.
civilizations, they don't have such scholarly tradition. We have like so many books, all like cross-referencing and a very good
Hmm.
way of citing everything, right? So that is one. Secondly, we were a very scientific civilization, so we had excellent mathematics and science and astronomy. So we embed the differences about other things. So, for example, if you read any kavya like Kalidasa or even Ramayana or Mahābhārata, you would see like so rich naturalistic references about birds, animals, geology,
Yes. Yeah.
ocean. So it's a very rich thing, and it's
Yeah.
not just uh, a few words and then finished, right? Secondly, stars and planets, what the astronomical phenomena that was happening.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
these all can be cross compared. So other civilizations don't have that luxury, right?
That richness.
What
Yeah.
what we unfortunately don't have because of our tropical setting, is we don't have so many objects which are like big objects that can be put in a
Preserved.
museum.
Yeah.
So that obviously would be perished over time, or maybe disappeared. We also don't have great architectural monuments like the pyramid,
Monumental. Yeah.
or what we see in Rome, or these great monuments most likely existed and were destroyed in the last 1,000 years or something.
Possibly. Yeah.
Uh, because we have references about that from Xuanzang and all these other visitors,
Correct.
right? Greek visitors, but we don't see these great temples or great monuments anymore, destroyed. Pratishtana, for example, was completely wiped out by Alauddin Khilji. So
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows what was there anymore, right? And we have even very recent history, like just 500 years ago, Vijayanagara was
Yeah.
completely smashed, the second largest city in the world, and was completely smashed. So
Right.
we have some things which are where we are lacking, where we cannot argue back, but it is not that much of a handicap, because even with the ruins and whatever we have left, we still
Mm-hmm.
have a very strong sense of connecting the dots, right?
Yeah.
One extremely important thing with India, which is not at all accepted in academic history making, is that we have a very strong sense of pilgrimage and a
Mm-hmm.
sense of sacred geography. And
Yeah.
so certain tirtha, certain
Ji.
places were referred in all this literature. So, for example,
Correct.
Mahābhārata has various tirtha yatras done by Balarama or
Yeah.
Arjuna. So they were like the same geography would be repeated again and again in all these things. So
Different stories. Yeah.
when we have such solid referencing for a spot which is still existing, where you still have, some temple maybe rebuilt, but it is the same
Mm-hmm.
tradition, right? So that is not connected in history. They don't accept that. So
Yeah.
British just decided to rubbish everything, and they put this arbitrary break saying, okay, we have the prehistory, which is
Mm-hmm.
just people hunting gathering societies or whatever.
Yeah.
They didn't care. And then we have the Buddhist period. So the Buddhist period, whatever is like artifacts that come out of this,
Mm-hmm.
they say that it's like a different country, different civilization, should not
Yeah.
be connected to anything else. And then you have the
Mm-hmm.
modern Hindu period, which they would accept, grudgingly, perhaps from the Gupta Empire. But basically, it's the same civilization, very continuous. Like
Ji.
going back to the Saraswati Sindhu, we still have the same motifs, same symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are a living civilization in
Breathing.
ancient
Yeah.
times. So we have to value that sense of geography what we have. Like so like I give an example, right? I come from the Godavari area,
Mm-hmm.
and have a very sacred town called Draksharama. Draksharama
Okay.
is the name in Telugu. Originally, it used to be called Daksharamam. What is that? Is
Okay.
and Daksha is the Prajapati, right? Ramam is his hermitage. So it's the
Okay.
hermitage of Daksha. That is the
Ji.
it's like a small village, small town on the banks of the Godavari there. So that thing is not mentioned at all in the history of Andhra Pradesh or history of
Mm.
my district. That is
Mm.
just
Yeah.
so it's as if we didn't have anything going on in this. So
Mm.
if we are like if you go through the official history, so it started by the British, obviously, and there was a British surveyor, Henry Morris, who described the history of the region. He would basically put aside all the mythic elements, so say
Mm.
that they don't
Us.
have any value, and the actual history and whatever in this district, it starts from the 11th century or so on. So imagine that,
Wow.
like the second largest river basin in mainland India, Godavari,
Mm.
and the giant river. And India has been populated since ancient times. And
Yeah.
what were the people doing there on this
Mm.
river basin?
Obviously. Yeah.
Obviously, and we have. ancient pilgrimage spots like this Daksha Prajapati's hermitage and many other things, and it's all connected. We have other
Correct.
Janapadas, right, all around. So they don't connect it. There's nobody like doing that. So my is the case of the Godavari district might be like particularly pathetic, but
Mm,
in a similar way, it's similar in many other locations.
absolutely.
So we don't connect the core, which is our literature, to the
Hmm.
archaeological evidence, and
Ji.
then to the living traditions. So we just yeah don't do that. So your question about the Ramayana and
Mahābhārata.
Mahabharata, Puranas, all these literature, right? So I would just consider that as, you know, literary evidence. So literature
Hmm.
is a type of evidence. Then
Hmm.
you have to tally that with other types of
Yeah.
evidence, and you need
Yeah.
to build a coherent story of the whole thing. So
Hmm.
it has to be a combined, coherent story, and you don't have to make like a very aggressive claims or strong claims
Yeah.
based on just one perspective.
Yeah. Just
Where you
correct.
have
Correct.
to combine all these things and build like some kind of a coherent story. If you
Ji.
just go back to our own tradition and just ignore the British, right? We have obviously the Panchanga calendar, different types of shakas. Like some people have the Saptarshi calendar in Kashmir. We
Hmm.
have the Vikrama Shaka or the some other. So they all have in their own calendar and their own chronology, like fairly decent accounting of the literary evidence coming from
Hmm.
the Itihāsas and Puranas or whatever, and also other more modern evidence from other kings, battles that were fought. So
Yeah.
that would be put on this type of a chronology. So you don't have to
Hmm.
completely accept it, but it is a living tradition which has a sense of history. So we have these things. Now, if you are saying, okay, we live right now in a world that is shaped by European project, the colonial project,
Gotcha.
and we are all, speaking English and using the Gregorian calendar and whatever. So you
Hmm.
have to express our sense of history in that thing. That's a different story. So you have to
Yeah. Yeah.
build
Yeah.
that into this
Sure.
calendar, right? And it's not even
For sure.
necessary for us. Like, why
Yeah.
do we?
Yeah.
But it helps because then it can cross tally with other historical happenings in other countries.
Sure.
For
Hmm.
example, the birth of Christ, or Confucius in China, or Alexander in Greece, whatever. You can kind of put these things on a single line. That is done by Europeans, not by us. So we are not doing that. We just
Hmm.
take it as if it's like God's word. But obviously, that's
Hmm.
all just hypothesis, right? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So this has to be done. It's like a project. At some
Project. Yeah.
point, it needs to be cross-tallied, and uh, also in the European chronology, we also have to put it.
And just put
Uh,
together. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so that I would say is less important. It's
Hmm.
more important that we ourselves have a sense of history in our own
Yeah.
literature and geography and archaeology, and build that in our own setting, and then use that for self-reflection and refining our value system and
Exactly.
all that.
To inform
That
ourselves.
I
Yeah.
would say is more important, and the other thing is a
Yeah.
little bit less important, but also very very useful and necessary,
Hmm.
especially because we cannot avoid it. Western academia is really very strong. Like everything is like all the great stories that we see
Decided.
in newspapers, politics in India is decided by these
Exactly.
guys. So we need to go there and kick their ass at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
We cannot avoid it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so on the Purans, one thing that fascinated me was that you can also sense an amazing depth and level of macro historic memory. So, for example, the Purans, they actually describe, they say that human beings first lived in the forests among the trees. Then it says that, okay, then they emerged from the forests, but to escape predators, they then found shelter in the caves, in the rocks. They describe that this was a stage when they were not tilling the grain. So they were just eating wild grain and berries. it describes the next step, that then they emerged from the caves. They started, cutting down the grasslands. Finally, they learned how to till the grain. Then small settlements arose. Then large. So this, I mean, and all of this is, if the Purans, even if we say that this was composed, let's say 500 AD, it's fascinating to me that there was insight. There were humans at that time who had perceived of this great time depth, and either there was information, memory that has continuously been passed down for such a Sanatan period that yes, it is still found in something like the Purans. So I found that very fascinating in terms of what it implies. Now, this is at one end, this kind of macro historic, association with it. At the other end, and this is what I wanted to get your view on, we have debates. For example, there is an ongoing debate that is the last section of the Valmiki Ramayana. Is it a part of the original Valmiki Ramayana, or is it a later addition to the Valmiki Ramayana? People have views and opinions on this, because in that last section is where you have the entire Agni Pariksha episode, you have the Shambhuka episode. So therefore, there is a lot of heat and focus just on this one small thing. How important is it? How much should it be explored? What is your take?
I So firstly, I would just look at that as texts of value, literary value,
Mm. Yeah.
and also moral value and spiritual value, right? That is the
Hmm.
reason why they have been put together in that form. Even the
Hmm.
Vedas,
Hmm.
they are not like records of like bookkeeping about what happened with one king against the other. That
Hmm.
if that is the all that matters, right? That would be ridiculous. It's not relevant for us now. It's
Hmm.
actually the reason why we care a lot about them is because they have deep philosophical, spiritual value, moral value, and they have been put in that format for that. And if you can argue about it, you can debate about it, you can even make counter positions, philosophical positions about it, and that's all welcome. And that you need to first treat it for what it is, right? Now, this way of dissecting texts and throwing things apart and trying to identify like uh,
Hmm.
like the ur text and
Right, right, right.
something like that, like a backbone skeleton. This is
Hmm.
a very peculiar European project, especially the Protestant project,
Hmm.
trying to kind of look at the Old Testament as a way of looking for clues in the Old Testament about the origin of Christ, and everything else has to be reinterpreted based on that. So there is some kind of a way of looking at these things here, which is just the I would say the fashion, and was applied to every other culture. So Adluri and Bagchi have argued a lot
Yeah.
about it. But so that way of breaking things in our texts um, is can be like a side job, but
Hmm.
somebody who might be peculiar and has this kind of activity interest, but it should not be the only job that is
True.
uh, that is actually violent, doing violence to the coherence of the text. And if you look at how other texts are treated, like from other ancient civilizations, right? So you have accretion in many types of texts. Like if you look at the Greek texts on philosophy or science,
Hmm.
they don't say that, oh, this thing was added in the 5th century or 7th century,
Sure, sure.
which we
Yeah.
very likely did, which happened around
Hmm.
that time. But they say that, oh yeah, this was discovered by Pythagoras or
Yeah.
Hipparchus, and they claim very ancient dates for these guys, and they do that for them, and for us they basically do the reverse, essentially.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we are made like a type
Yeah.
of
Correct.
dependent
Yeah.
civilization which doesn't have its own historical axis. Everything is
Hmm.
basically tagged along to what they say, and the main
Correct.
events are happening there, and we are just following, which is stupid. I mean, we don't know, why do we have to follow that? That's just rubbish.
Yeah.
And then if we can talk back, I mean, you said about this macro historical memory, right? Our
Hmm.
Puranas and other things, they remember like ancient human civilizational past.
Hmm.
Which other civilization has that?
Exactly.
Honestly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Which civilization actually remembers all these stages so precisely? it obviously just shows how rubbish their arguments are, right? Because we have that sense of continuity. So I would say that this dating of a text, right, like to a peculiar date in the European calendar, and whether the whole text has to be dated to that time or whether specific parts have to be dated to that time, that is actually less relevant. What is more relevant is tagging the text to our geography and other evidence in our archaeology, and that is more important. So this work has been started here by Indian archaeologists, but it's not picking up speed. But at some point, our story would be coherent enough and strong enough that we also would have fairly strong ways to argue why this chronological timeline is actually fitting better in the European timeline and not necessarily.
Absolutely.
So generally speaking, like my opinion is that India had its own unique discovery of agriculture. Perhaps couple of things might have been borrowed from some other civilization like China or Mesopotamia or whatever, but we had founder crops in our main.
Absolutely.
So many crops, which are very important crops, were actually from here. And we not necessarily just crops, we also have domestic animals like the oxen, like the
cow.
And so these are like obvious that we have our own ancient starting point, and in contrast to others, we were like continuing, and we still have the memories of these times.
Absolutely.
So that is point number one. Point number two, we were also the largest, like the agricultural land mass in the whole planet. I read somewhere that the Sindhu Saraswati basin was 3 times at least larger than everything else put together.
Both of them combined,
Like the Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, whatever. Like put everything else put together in the world, like all agricultural land.
I don't think China. I think it was Mesopotamia and Sumer put together. But yeah, either way, the scale and difference.
And Egypt. So put all these things together, multiply that by 3. And that would be still less than Sindhu Saraswati area. So this obviously shows that these people were, prolific producers of a lot of things, culture, economy, and obviously would shape the rest of the world. It's like the common sense observation. What would happen when you have such a large economy like United States, for example, right? Why do we speak English? Because we have an ongoing large power, which is giant heft of the global GDP, which is the United States. Which still shapes the rest of the world's culture. And similarly, like if you just look at the world's history, and India was one such thing. It has a giant landmass. So that is another thing. The third thing is that we have like fairly strong symbols, artifacts of Indian origin, which are distributed all over the world. Like they are there in Mesopotamia. Like they have statues and symbols of the Zebu. Like why
peacock motif,
the
peacock, swastika.
So we have so many Indian motifs which are all over the world. Also in China, by the way, like a lot of them. So, and it's not just like in a one-off thing. They just happened at one point and then stop. We have a continuous waves of things that were going from India to Europe to Egypt to Mesopotamia to China. We didn't care, previously to kind of tally that and put these things together into one timeline. But you have to ask yourself, like, why does anybody do that? Why do the Europeans care so much about putting Indian civilization and Indian geography into their own? Or why do any civilization do that for others? They do that precisely for only one reason, which is basically they want to politically administer the other country.
Correct.
Because then they have to have a standard storyline, right? So this is an output of the colonial period that they had this thing. Until then, it was not necessary. So we didn't have such colonial premonitions or desires, even when India was fairly strongly and steadily influencing the whole Indian Ocean, Indonesia, and so on. We didn't incorporate in our texts the geography and this history of these lands into our own Puranas. So it
Yeah.
is a mistake at that time.
Yeah.
We didn't care at that time to
Hmm.
put these things together, but that can be rectified. Why not? We can just like look back and collect all the evidence and
Yeah.
redesign our literature so that other civilizations and other cultures can also be part of it. And for example, the Greeks have very, very big imagery of Dionysus, right? The god of,
Dionysus, yeah, Shiva, Shiva, yeah,
and they even say that this guy went to India,
came from India. Yeah.
from
I
India.
think they say for their first Dionysus was from India.
You're right.
That is what
They
I've read.
have both stories, but in any way,
Mm,
it's Darius was basically an Indian figure from the Greek point of view. So why do we not put that in our
absolutely.
mythic imagery? Like who does it tally with? My guess is that it's fairly. I feel that it's really very strongly connected to Skanda, Kumara of.
Okay.
Uh,
Gupta.
no,
Skanda Kumar,
not
sorry.
a
Oh, the deity.
no,
Sorry, sorry.
not the king. I'm saying
Yeah, yeah.
the uh, the
Murugan.
Shanmuka, Skanda, the
Mm,
son of Shiva and Parvati.
Shiv,
So
yeah,
this
yeah.
this imagery might have moved
Mm,
to many countries and might have served something like an astronomical significance. Like
mm,
we know that the six phases are somehow connected to the Pleiades, which is a very important constellation, and it's a
constellation.
way of tracking this and setting a calendar, and useful obviously for navigation and agriculture and so on, right? So these ideas have a utility, practical utility, would be adapted a little bit into the local culture and geographical religious setting. So we need to kind of claim that back at some point.
Mm,
It's not just the Greek, but also maybe Chinese, maybe uh, Egyptian. We do have parallels, and we need to kind of be aware of this. We also have to be conscious that the Western academia would prevent Indians claiming any of these things, and we need to prepare like
yeah.
sufficient
The armament. Yeah,
ammunition for
yeah.
identifying these
Now,
types of facts.
so I completely agree. But now one counter, or at least one challenge that comes to this thing that you're saying is that so we know that, as you rightly said, that they've used history and all of these things, with their agenda, and then our civilization has just been, chopped up randomly, etc., analyzed, dissected. Now we know that that's been done with language, right? So the whole Proto-Indo-European Dravidian thing, and we see it as an ongoing endeavor in genetics as well. Now genetics has been used for the same agenda, which is to call it, to use a headline, it's the Breaking India agenda, and that is still a very live agenda. Now we can have the whole scholarship response to let's say Witzel and the linguists. We can have a response to Trushke, the historians. We can have a response to genetic findings. But in the real time, in reality, in society by now, you have crazy and absurd debates that are psychologically, sociologically damaging, relevant in the real world. Aryan versus Dravidian divide perpetrated by North versus South divide. On top of that, reinforced by some kind of genetic divide that has been used to give a narrative to the caste system, which the narrative is such that, the incidents can fall on anyone. It's not that if there is a Brahmin, they might not suffer from the kind of divisive agenda that the caste system generates. So beyond our scholarship response, and I agree with you, where okay, let's develop the armaments to defeat Western academia. But while we're defeating Western academia, what do we do, or how could we address the sociological problems of India because of this?
I look at it as separate battles, and
Hmm,
each one has its own sense of urgency. Like, for
hmm,
example, the battle of the Aryan Dravidian thing. It's just shocking to me why it's still persisting, because
yeah,
it
yeah,
can be attacked very, very well. Like, even right now,
exactly.
it can be
So
exposed.
that's there.
Uh,
Yeah,
the story of
yeah,
like how this has been formulated, it's a bullshit racist
absolutely.
system. The Bishop Robert Caldwell, he
Hmm,
was he had really ludicrous and very colorful ideas about racist mixtures and so on. It's just like it is like science fiction, in some sense. It's really, really absurdly ridiculous, and things have been built on top of that, right? So you can really attack it. You don't know, nobody would stop you. Like
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
something that can just be exposed and beaten up and completely rubbished in like no time, and that has to be done. So these
Absolutely.
different battles need to be fought
Mm.
separately. um,
Yeah.
the battle about genetics, or like a common chronology between Europe and India and so on.
Mm-hmm.
These are a bit harder. And why is
Mm.
it harder? Because it is not just concerning us. It is actually something that we,
Shared
our
story.
cousins in Europe and United States and China, we all have to build together a story. And naturally,
Mm-hmm.
when we are trying to do something as a common endeavor, there will be power dynamics. So it's not
Yeah.
about truth, it's about power. And we don't have that power now. So we have to accept that. Like we don't have
Mm-hmm.
a
Okay.
level of
Mm.
economic power or whatever. Nobody would just
Mm.
say, okay, you are saying the truth, let's all accept it, clap, and follow them. No, they don't do that. So the reason why the history is important is that, as I said, when they put everything else on their chronology, on their sense of geography, then they can actually define a story for the future, for the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like
Mm-hmm.
ruling the whole world, right? Why would they give
Mm-hmm.
that give that thing to us? And it's not just about politics; it's also about religion. So if we
Mm.
like Indians, we say that we have a long, continuous sense of past,
Correct. Yeah.
ancient macro historical memory. We have founder crops in India. We have
Yeah.
solid continuous living traditions, attested by archaeological evidence and so on. That basically is threatening to them, because
Mm.
that means that their own religion would be derivative, their own culture
Yeah.
and civilization would be derivative. When that happens, they would be answerable to us. So we don't ask, we don't care, what they do. We might be totally disinterested, but they feel threatened, because then we
Mm.
can, anybody from our point of view, we can go there and ask, okay,
Mm.
what you have is actually a misinterpretation and rubbish, and
Mm-hmm.
what is the correct thing is what we are doing.
Our
Yeah.
version. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that anybody can do any point. I'm not interested. Might not be interested, but we have the potential to do that. So essentially,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that we have to realize, that we have, just for by the
Primacy. Yeah.
sheer chance of sitting in India with this
Mm.
giant historical memory and geographical landmass with so much of cultural influence and economic influence throughout history.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are threatened by that. They will
Mm.
not admit it like this, but the reason why we
Sure.
have so much of Hindu phobia, so much of
Mm.
bullshitting, even now and in post-colonial period, it's not about just the colonial period, even now, because
Mm-hmm.
they cannot accept it. It is not that easy. Okay, it's the same thing with the Aryan story. They will not accept it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
No, they
not
won't. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not just so this something, we have to do that in long term, and
Mm.
it's not like we will fix it in overnight. Let them, let's amuse them, let's entertain them, and they know that
Yeah.
they're fighting a losing battle, at
Mm.
some
Yeah.
point
Yeah. And
give up.
we've started to now pick up all the rules of the game. We've started to learn how to play it. As you said, we're now building up all the armaments required to be able to compete with them, at least on the academia part and the models, these
Yeah,
things. So yeah.
but let's amuse them. I prefer that we have this sense of open mind also from our side,
Mm.
but they're fighting a losing battle. Essentially,
Mm.
they will not admit it so easily, and but the reverberation effects of what's happening, like Tony Joseph doing bullshit in
Yeah.
Indian newspapers and so on, and random bullshit interpretations of some
Mm-hmm.
other evidence and genetics onto modern
Exactly.
politics and so
Yeah.
on. This thing, you know,
Mm.
this will not be fought by the academic battle. That is completely a separate battle. I don't think that is
Mm-hmm.
relevant to, because we can win the academic battle, but we will not win this thing. This is a
Mm-hmm.
different beast. These guys
Mm.
will keep on doing that, and that's a way of
Exactly. Yeah.
winning us. So
Mm.
in order to win this, the only thing that will fix the problem is when we actually build a native sense of civilizational identity and culture in our native idiom, native languages, native stories. So when we keep saying these stories, at some point, these guys will just say, okay, to hell with it. We cannot just compete here. That is exactly what will happen, because they are just doing this type of throwing some type of bone of contention and fights, because we are still like coming out of the colonial memory. We are just very worried of our sense of stability and so on. So we are just worried that they might just destroy our home and take us apart. So we are reacting to all these things, and that we'll do that like maybe another 50 years, who knows. But at some point it will
50.
yeah, like I don't know, it might stop like in a couple of years, I don't know. But at some point it will stop, right? But
we'll have to keep at it. We'll have to keep at it for that, right? When you say at some point it'll stop.
Yeah, like from my point of view, like the reason why that would stop is when we actually build our story strongly. It's not because we are reacting to them and addressing these things. We have to build our story strongly and like rediscover, all our texts, all our scholarly tradition, reinterpret these traditions, and build new cultural artifacts. And when we see that it's like a thriving, living culture, again, then at some point they will just have to accept it, right? It's but this is the thing, and I would argue that the more efforts we go into the second battle, like what I said is the common chronology between Europe and India and so on, it is basically a zero-sum game. So there will be definitely only one winner. You cannot just have everything, because that is the formulation of this. So it is threatening to them, right? So while we do that, we have to also actively make efforts on non-zero-sum games, which is basically showing Indian civilization and its value to the rest of the world and to our current problems. And for that, we need our story. So that once we build that strongly, right, then naturally the fear and the threatening, the threats that they might feel, like we might not intend it, but they might feel, they will slowly go down. So this will take a little bit of time, because basically like colonial history and ongoing intellectual colonization of our elite especially, but generally the whole public, language loss, culture loss. So because of this, we are also having problems. So I would say that the third battle, like what I said, is like the more important one, reconnecting the dots from our side, building our own story. So this, I am disappointed actually, because this is where I'm actually more interested. This part is very necessary, not just because for our own sake, but for the sake of the world, for the sake of the current problems. We need to build a strong story here, and so hopefully at some point this will be going.
So it's great that we've reached here, because then that is actually what we have to talk about, right? Which is, what is our own story and how can we describe our story, etc. So can we start with the terms Bharat and Ārya? So I mean, I have a couple of questions to that, but I've seen your threads also on how you draw what their meaning is etymologically, ontologically, and how we should relate to them, and why that is our self-appellation. So Bharat and Ārya, can you take us through that?
Yeah, it's actually very simple. If you just don't have any prejudice on any other colonial baggage to interpret any of these terms, you just look at it like, okay, India is ancient civilization, a very central thing for the story of the world, had its native agriculture and native sense of society and so on. What would be the type of things that such a civilization would value? Just ignore India. Just ask what would be the type of things that such a civilization might definitely value. One, in order to first survive in a village against the vagaries of nature, against wildlife, against all that, we need to have fire. So fire is very, very important. Like we need to keep the fire. We should not let it die. So we
Right, right.
have to really, value that. So if you just look at that just from that point of view, like from an anthropological point of view, you would see why this is symbolically identified as the central core, right? So
Yes.
Bharatas are people who bear the fire. So they are
Mm-hmm.
the uh, and that is how the rishis, and you have the tradition of keeping the household of fire, different types of agni that you need to cater
Mm-hmm.
to. You have living parallels to that, like in the Zoroastrian religion, they also value that, right? And it's not
Right,
just
right.
that. Like if you look at even remote, disconnected societies, like some hunting gathering society in Africa or Papua New Guinea or whatever, if they know fire, they know how to value that. So they would have their own
Mm-hmm.
symbol, their own values. So that is one thing, right? The second thing is that if you want to have agriculture, and agriculture has to be reliable, if you, let's say, have a lot of food, one season you have a lot of food, you procreate a lot, you consume that food, you grow a big society. The next year it collapses, okay, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
bear through a lot of suffering, a lot of people will die,
Yeah.
famine, and that is really shocking, and something that has to be avoided, right? So you need to understand the limits of what you can produce, how reliably you can produce, how can you support this society, so that you don't have dukkha, you don't have
Mm-hmm.
the suffering. So for that, you need to have technology, you need to have some science, you need to also have
Yes.
culture to value those things, right? This is where dharma is ultimately about support. So
Mm.
sustaining. What would be
Right.
dharma? Like what we can keep on doing it without having pain, and this
Mm-hmm.
sense is actually lost now in the modern period, right? We don't have that. And this is where we actually have to contribute. But for an agriculture, where in the very, very beginning of human civilization, if you have to establish agriculture, a very important thing if you want to reliably produce crops is irrigation. Irrigation
Right.
is needed to channel the various rivers, and so that you can reliably get water for your growing the crops. So that is would be essential. If you just objectively look at what would a civilization need, that would be that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
these are the root elements of our civilization, which are
Mm.
celebrated or in different realms of philosophical interpretation, and not just in the adhibhautika physical plane where we just have to
Yeah.
eat food,
Yeah.
keep fire, and survive, but also
Yeah.
on the intellectual plane, on the spiritual plane. What is fire ideal? Like what is actually fire? You know,
Yeah.
in our own consciousness, is there something like a fire?
Correct. Yeah.
Is there something like water?
Mm.
These are things that our rishis have been thinking about, and they have
Yeah. Mm.
seen those things. I don't want to
Mm.
reduce everything to such simple imagery, but
Mm-hmm.
because it cannot express what I cannot express what they have seen in all these things, right? So Arya would be somebody who would be, you know, flourishing through this irrigation and agricultural practices. And you it's very simple to connect that. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous how the Indologists missed that element. Even if Indians themselves had this very clearly in our grammar and everything, it's just
Mm-hmm.
about irrigation and agriculture, and that is the root of the word Arya, which
Mm.
just like the word cultured or cultivated, it comes from
Mm.
you know irrigation, like
Mm-hmm.
what are these
Yeah.
things that are happening,
Flourishing.
right, to support, like even
Yeah.
now you say cultivation of crops or cultivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that uh, is the same way how we actually adapted Arya to mean noble or cultured or civilized.
Mm-hmm.
So at some
Mm-hmm.
point, this sense of um, yeah a rich society which is irrigated and which is flourishing with crops and so on, would also have an elevated civilizational ethic, elevated culture, and that's all Arya. So that's all Arya.
Okay.
So if you just look at these words, right, the Bharata or Arya, and you just say, okay, Bharata is just only North India. and not
Mm.
South India.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, right. Makes sense.
Ārya means only, the Āryavarta, the large plain that has been irrigated um,
Mm-hmm.
from Sindhu to the Ganges, the Ganga,
Ganges, yeah.
until the ocean between the Himalaya and Vindhya. Beyond that is no Arya. That is rubbish.
Mm.
Like how is that?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at South Indian languages, right? They all have the word Arya. So in Telugu, for
Aryan, yeah.
example, we're writing like a email in Telugu or a letter. We say respected sir or whatever, right? We say
Mm-hmm.
Arya. That is the word we use. Because
Mm.
Arya, somebody is like the way we address, and
Mm-hmm.
Arya is like the more formal. We say Ayya. Ayya is like
Yeah.
the Prakrit version. It's all over the place, and in Tamil they have this thing. So our civilization is all Arya. Like it's not just
Ji.
yeah. So it is rubbish how this has been kind of interpreted through racist history. But if you just look at
Mm-hmm. Of
our
course.
native history, like what our literature says, so we have the references to these words in Vedas, in our Smriti. Manusmriti has a beautiful exposition of the various phases of growth of our
Okay.
civilization, and this is
Okay.
great because it also connects the four Varanas. So
I
I
see. I see.
I think I spoke about it on Twitter, but there is a misconception that Manusmriti is talking only about the North Indian plain, like until the
Mm-hmm.
Aryavarta. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, if you read the verses of what they say, they mention four different regions. Okay,
Okay.
there are, so Manu in the very beginning in the Manusmriti, he says four different regions consecutively bigger. Like the first one
Mm.
is the smallest circle,
Okay.
and a little bit bigger around that, and then more bigger than that, and then overlapping. So this consecutively larger areas is how our civilization grew. So our
Mm-hmm.
civilization is our urban elite, civilized culture. There are people living there, like
Mm.
forests and so on, but the values and the philosophy and technology and science, it grew in these four regions.
Absolutely.
And the
Yeah.
four regions are Brahmavarta, between the Saraswati and the Drushadvati rivers. That is the
Mm-hmm.
top
Mm-hmm.
smallest, and it would be
Correct.
Haryana, right now, modern Haryana, and a little bit
And
northern Pakistan.
that would be that core Rigvedic phase, right? Of the
That
Puru
would
Bharats and the Ārya. Yeah.
right. So that is the Brahmavarta, and Manu says
Correct.
Brahmavarta is where the best Brahmanas come. So even now, if you want to know the right way of following anything, the Brahmanas look up to that particular region.
Mm-hmm.
So that is
Ji.
Brahmavarta. Then you have a little bit bigger the Madhya Desha, including the Kurukshetra and the other plains. So it would be
Mm-hmm.
like I would say the classic Sindhu Saraswati area, where you have settlements all over the place, but a little bit around the Haryana area. So they call it Madhya Desha, and Manu connects that with Kshatriyas. That is where the great Kshatriya
Okay.
kings came. So the
Mm-hmm.
Kurus, the
Okay.
Panchalas. So that
Mm.
is so the Brahmavarta, he says, where the Brahmanas came, and then the Madhyadesha is where the Kshatriyas, established. And then he says we have the Aryavarta, which is the plain between the Himalaya and the Vindhya, and that is actually self-explanatory because it is where all the crops grow. It's densely
That
irrigated.
is the Aryavarta. It's literally Aryavarta. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the Aryavarta, and Arya means Vaishya, essentially. Vaishya is, originally it meant farmer. It also includes, when you do farming, you get surplus, right? So with surplus, you can do trade. So farming and trade go hand in hand. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Aryavarta, the Vaishya, would be also,
Yeah.
capable of
And
doing.
Vaishya comes from Vish, right? So Vish, the root itself means to spread, to
To spread,
pervade.
yeah, to
So,
spread. Yeah.
so Vaishya, yeah, yeah.
So
Even Vishnu actually comes from that, I think. So,
yes.
from
So
the root, yeah.
and naturally that spread from that central civilizational core
Mm.
to the whole expanse, and that would be like the
Yeah.
geography where we had a lot of people. So that would be like very densely populated since
By
ancient
that
times.
time, yeah.
Yeah, and so you can just imagine that this big chunk between the Himalaya and Vindhya, the people there would move to other regions. They already started moving and growing crops. They would move within India. They would move also to other nearby geographies and so on. Anyway, so that is the third region, that is the Ārya-Varta. But then there is also the fourth region. That fourth region, he says, is the Yajñiyo Desha. Yajñiyo Desha, Yajna is the sacrifice, and also a way of saying civilizational way of looking at society, and how we contribute together. All of the people put together in the society, live in a village and share the ideas, share the surplus. So we know we have the system, the village system is called Jajmani in the north, right? Jajmani from Yajna. So it's the Yajna based system. So you basically pull your resources together and support each other. So that is the Yajñiyo Desha, where this system is happening, where it is fit, where it is fit for doing the Yajna. And Manu beautifully says that this is Yajñiyo Desha is where is the biological habitat of the Krishna Mruga, the black antelope. So if you look at the black antelope ecological habitat, it's precisely the Indian subcontinent. It's exactly that. So Yajñiyo Desha is where, any region where in that land where, it's possible to do yajna. And with yajna, you do the astronomical tallying of the stars, and then you have a calendar, you basically do irrigation, you start to grow crops, you can have a village, and so on. So the Yajñiyo Desha is connected to Shudra. So we have the four Varna. So the Brahmanas from Brahmavarta, Madhyadesha, Kshatriya, and Vaishya from Ārya-Varta, and Shudra from Yajñiyo Desha. It's a way of saying that the four Varnas also grew in this order in the beginning, but only Brahmanas. This is another peculiar thing. We say that in the very, very beginning, in the Satya Yuga, everybody was a Brahmana. So there was no other Varna. This was our historical memory. But if you look at Marxist history, for example, they say that in the beginning, it was just Shudra or Vaishya, and then there would be kings, and then there would be Brahman. But we have the exact opposite way of looking at it. So in the beginning, there were just these people. They were doing everything. And then we have kingdoms who kind of spread this civilization. Then we have agricultural surplus, people who are able to peacefully just do farming and not worry about war, because that's being taken care of by a different Varna. That level of civilizational ethics, so that we don't have violence. And then once you have a strong civilization like that, there can be a flourishing of arts and crafts who can cater to these people, and that can come from all over the place. And these people are all working with each other, right? So the Varnas cannot stand by themselves. So that is another misconception. Sadly, this is the stupid thing when we say caste, because it's really not at all like a jati or a separate. Varna only makes sense when you are all sharing things together in a yajna. So they all have to do their best and support each other, like a wife and a husband brings a family together, right? So similarly, anyway, so that is our original understanding of these words, Ārya and Bhārata. And Bhārata has been celebrated in Rāmāyaṇa and in many other mythic figures, right? So and it's a way of saying that we are he is somebody who is actually bearing the responsibility, civilizational responsibility of putting this.
To that, in fact, what I like to think of. 1 second, my voice is my voice echoing to you?
No, it's fine.
I just want. So you're saying the story of Bharat, and he's mentioned in the Mahābhārata also. He's mentioned in the Purans also. What I like thinking about is that Ved Vyas is credited behind the composition of the Mahābhārata in the core story, the Jaya, and also as the first one to disseminate the Puran to his disciple Romaharshan. Now the Purans also have the story of Bharat, the son of Rishabdev, who is a whole different lineage, which Rishabdev being the Jain Tirthankar. And it says, the Purans say that, okay, it is that Bharat that the country got its name from. So I was thinking that it's so interesting that this one person, plausibly, Ved Vyas, seeds two different kinds of stories. One of this Bharat, and that him being the person the name comes from, and one of this. I think that was maybe, and now maybe this is over engineering, but maybe that was a way to ensure that we are not fixating ourselves to this one human, that, oh, this human being, this one guy called, that the way for us to route to Bharat and take it forward would be a more, a larger and, not one technical association to one
Yeah.
man.
Actually, this is a good example to just explain a little bit about our concept of sampradayam. So we
Hmm.
have a diverse, decentralized ecology of
Yeah,
uh, scholarly tradition and value systems that come from sampradaya, right? So we have the Jain sampradaya. We have within
yeah,
the Vedas, we have different sampradayas from different rishis, and we have other darshanas, and we have the tantra and many other sampradaya, right? So each has the freedom to kind of look at these history and look at our values and our culture and choose how to
hmm,
tell a story about it. So there would be like this, it is the same story, but they will tell it in a slightly different way with with some values which are a little bit more important for their sampradaya. They might
yeah, yeah,
emphasize. So this would be a very simple thing for Indians
sure.
to
Hmm.
accept, like,
Yeah,
it's the same story but told in two different
correct.
musical raga or something like that,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
exactly. This is how I look at it anyway.
Hmm.
I don't want to break my head about this
Sure, yeah,
categorical identification of who is exactly that Bharata, who is the
absolutely. Yeah.
Vyasa, and so on. Because, yeah, why is that necessary for us,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
our experience here? So it's more like, um, yeah, live and let live way of looking,
Hmm.
where all these people enjoy their sampradaya and they also respect other sampradayas, right? That
Hmm.
is the key thing. So we have in dharma, we have the not tolerance, it's actually be a celebration of all the sampradayas.
Yeah, yeah.
So and it's interesting also, this idea of recursion in how we
Hmm.
look at
Hmm. Yeah,
time.
yeah. Hmm.
So Vyasa, puts everything together
Put
and
something
then rebuilds
told
the.
someone else. Yeah,
Yeah. So this
yeah, yeah.
is something that would be quite natural for a civilization that thinks of itself as a,
Exactly.
yeah, it
Absolutely.
has to keep
Exactly.
going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So yeah,
Exactly. So that's what. Yeah, please go on, please.
yeah. So we have a different yeah, historical imagination,
Sense. Yeah, yeah.
and we don't necessarily go on this linear timeline and
Bilkul. Yeah.
exactly the same. We have, reincarnation. The same person or the same deva might
Hmm.
reincarnate several times. The sun reincarnates every day, right?
Hmm.
Essentially, and essentially all the devas, in some sense, they
Yeah.
reincarnate, and we say that they also come in human form and
Hmm.
do
Hmm.
their job and go away. So we have a fairly relaxed
Yeah.
view of identifying who is exactly
Hmm.
that person. It could be several human lives that contributed to this Vyasa, but it might be the same Vyasa,
Absolutely.
right? Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and what we've talked about, you mentioned, the accretion of layers, right? That, okay, even in our conceptualization from the Manusmriti that you mentioned. So maybe there was a core layer of Brahmavart, but then, there's accretion, time goes on, idea develops over idea. So this is my way of understanding. This was actually Shri, through Shri Aurobindo and his Secret of the Ved. So, prior to that, to think that, okay, the Vedic ritual is just this physical fire, so it's actually a fire ritual. But then you understand that, okay, when they were engaging with this fire and the yajna, and they were introspecting about it, they started thinking of the fire within. And so
Mm.
then the yajna became also something internalized. So Agni within you has to be kindled. They were looking at light already, so Agni, light, and then that led to them with accretion of ideas to think of consciousness, and therefore, Agni reaches from Prithvi, goes to Dyos, the sky above. Just like that, our consciousness needs to go from our mortal vessels and engage with the transcendent. So that is how these ideas have developed. And so that gives to us some intuitions about Indian civilization, its development, the values it has held dear, which I found that your article, The Infinite Lotus, That article where you conceive of the Indian civilization, the motif being of an infinitely blooming lotus. So let's talk about that article now, because I think that will help us unpack more about Indian civilization. So if you can just start with that concept itself, how you think of
Yeah.
it.
So there is a great essay by Anand Kumaraswamy. So another person
Hmm.
I was reading just the last few years, so that I wanted to formulate my ideas about ethics and technology and so on a little bit more solid dharmic grounds. And Anand Kumaraswamy had a great essay,
Hmm.
and he was talking about the shared symbolism between Buddhist and Hindu religions. In fact, there is no Buddhism as a separate religion; it's just another
Jay,
sampradaya. So when you look at that, it's just obvious that they would have the same
mm,
symbols. So he says that there are the wheel and the lotus and the tree.
mm,
So he says
mm,
so it's a nice essay. I discovered this just when I was trying to formulate my own an essay on what are
mm,
Indian values. I first wrote an essay called "The Cosmic Wheel" about Rutam and why Rutam is so important.
mm,
And because I wanted to
mm.
say that okay, we just ignore other random rubbish what they talk about Indian values. We should just talk about
Mm.
what is important for us. And
Correct.
here is this obviously important thing, Rutam. That is where we
Mm,
should
mm,
start. And I wanted to write an essay on it. So I wrote an essay called "The Cosmic Wheel." And then I referred to this essay by Anand Kumaraswamy, and he had these other symbols. So and I really liked it. So I thought, okay, I'll write
mhm,
two other essays. So I wrote one more on the lotus, but not
mhm.
on the tree. Hopefully soon at some
Okay,
point.
okay, okay.
So
Mm,
the lotus is I think he says that it is basically the world lotus and the ethical wheel or something like that. He has a different interpretation. It's not exactly the same. So I saw
sure.
obviously Rutam is the universal cosmos, and so I named
Correct.
it cosmic wheel. So the lotus, he said it's the world lotus because it's where you see the Buddha seated on the lotus, Padmasana, right? So,
Okay,
uh,
okay.
and it's always like the basis, like the Brahma is also blooming from a lotus from Vishnu. So
G.
it's like the seat. But that itself is not like I felt that is actually not the core symbolism here. And I was trying to express what would be the best symbolism for this. And when I was writing my previous essay on the wheel, I
Mm-hmm.
thought it's actually interesting when we look at any of these symbols, like it could be the wheel, it could be the lotus or anything. We just try to interpret that through the three planes: the Adhibhautika,
G.
Adhidaivika,
Mm.
and the Adhyatmika.
Adhyatmika. Yeah.
So the Adhibhautika would be something more physical based, and then the Adhidaivika would be something related to
That's
our
possible.
mental capacities, the
Yeah.
perception and the reasoning, and what we would see to yeah uh, build our consciousness, right? And the third would be the internal spiritual
Transcendent.
plane,
Yeah.
the Adhyatmika plane. So we have a rich discourse on all these three planes with using all these symbols. So I thought, okay, I'll just interpret these things. When I was reading, I thought I would read Kalidasa to find good references, and then it was clear that what it really meant. And also
Mm.
I packed a couple of other references in this essay from the standard stotram, like there is the Ashtotra stotram from Lakshmi, where you keep saying, lotus, lotus, lotus again.
Mm.
It's a beautiful thing, so these are obvious to me, and I was a bit puzzled that nobody actually mentioned that before. It means
Mm-hmm.
infinity. It's actually about recursion and infinite, where
Right, right, right.
it's a way of
Mm.
representing infinity, the lotus, and it's a beautiful
Infinity. Mm.
representation of
Mm-hmm.
infinity. And I think yeah, it's sad we use this the
The
lemniscate,
loop. Yeah.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
this symbol. It's not as beautiful as the lotus actually when
Mm. Yeah.
you
It
look.
doesn't evoke all the things it could evoke. The lotus. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you see that, it's a symbol of infinity, and wherever you see the lotus in Indian temples or
Yeah.
any poems and so on, you just have a beautiful appreciation of the richness of the thought behind it. So I kind of expressed that in that essay. And one especially the important point, maybe I'll just mention this point, is that it's a holistic vision of the cosmos. So
G.
it's lotus
Yeah.
blooms petals in all directions, right? So it's not just based on one axes. It has many axes, and on all these axes you need to bloom. And this is why we
Ji.
say, for progress we say vikasa. So it has to be like a
Mm-hmm.
lotus vikasa.
Mm-hmm.
And it should
Right.
not be just economy or food or culture or spirituality. We should have a multidimensional blooming. And if you look at this way of holistic way of looking at life, it's very similar also in the European Renaissance, a little bit later in the German period, the Romanticists, Goethe and Humboldt. They also had the same ideas. Like they wanted to have a holistic vision. So there should not be art, sciences, and different.
Correct.
We need
Mm-hmm.
to have a
Yeah.
holistic vision. So it actually gels very well also with that period, the Romantic period in the European
Mm-hmm.
intellectual movement. So especially in the this way of understanding universe and as a whole is as a whole purna, and you have lotus in different petals, each representing an aspect of it. And
Mm-hmm.
nothing is bad. In fact, you cannot just have the lotus if you just cut off a petal. It looks ugly. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
have everything in the universe has to be uh,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
divine, essentially.
Right.
And
Right.
so that is actually a very good revelation also for me, because if you look at Indian culture and how we are actually, why we value everything and why we respect diversity and different things, because we just don't have this idea of banishing something as Satan or devil or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not part of God, because once you say that, then it would be a finite God. Once you
Yep.
say
Yeah.
one, this is not part of it.
Yeah.
And the Christians and Muslims have this puzzle. They have their own theories how to kind of take care of it.
Sure.
But yeah, Indians have a very solid basis how to argue about these things. So we have a way of saying that, okay, dukkha or suffering or bad things happen when we come out of balance. So when we have everything in
Mm-hmm.
balance, everything is good. So we have a holistic vision.
Ji.
When we are unbalanced, then bad things happen. So it's a very simple and
Yeah.
elegant way of formulating it, and
Yeah.
at the same time, an elegant representation of infinity, because then it is
Mm-hmm.
basically purna,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, you used some imagery even there, right? You talked about the Ouroboros snake, which is the
Yeah,
snake that eats its own tail. And it's an imagery that evokes also infinity and it evokes also recursiveness, right? The snake eating
yeah,
its own tail. And
yeah.
I think about the word mandal, right? Which is
Mhm.
a word, for example, used for books of the Rig Veda, though I don't like calling them books, mandals. And it's
Mhm.
very interesting to me that the first mandal of the Rig Veda has 191 suktas. The 10th mandal of the Rig Veda also has 191
Mhm.
suktas. So the Rig Veda itself is a mandal. It's like the Ouroboros snake. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, as you said, the same. So this is a quote, for example, by Rajiv Malhotra, sir. I saw it in a video of his, that we are a civilization where the same truth, like a seed, is embedded into every layer
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
civilization. And
Absolutely.
that's what evokes, these kind of feelings of, you find the same concept, the same notion of infinity, etc. Uh,
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, I like the word mandala, and
yeah.
it is uh, yeah, it's a very elegant representation of any domain where we would like to interpret that through
Yeah,
our sense of sacred, through
exactly.
this infinite. And um, yeah, I also just read your article on this mandala, fractal
Yeah.
mandala, where you
Which one? The Beej one, the Rath one, or there's another one also.
I think the
Uh,
earlier one was
okay,
was
that the macro historical case for India's civilizational primacy. That one.
I think it's the Radha,
Oh,
probably
please.
the Radha
Okay.
man. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
it's it's actually correct. I agree with that.
It's the
Uh,
same. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the wheel, chakra as a motif,
yeah,
Padma as a motif. So, I mean,
yeah.
similar to, yeah.
It is exactly the same idea. And in fact, if you just look at mandalas, how
Hmm.
the Buddhists draw the mandalas, or how we have
Absolutely. Yeah.
mandalas on the Sthapatya Veda and the temples and so on,
Mm.
you just see the lotus all the time in these mandalas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The lotus is
Yeah.
basically the quintessential symbol, but the
Yeah.
more general word would be probably mandala for this thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
I would
Hmm.
I would say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And I also like how Shiva Kumar sir, Samanya GV on Twitter. So he talks about Sutra thinking,
Right.
and he
Yeah.
contrasts between Sutra thinking and systems thinking. So
Mhm.
systems thinking is that, okay, science, social science, physics, chemistry, but that's systems thinking. If at all you want to build a civilizational mandal with recursiveness built in, with the notion of infinity built in, I think Sutra thinking seems to convey, or at least hold
Yeah.
in it some of that intuition. Uh,
Yeah, it's
in
actually
this.
the difference actually is that
Hmm.
if I may formulate it like this,
Please.
the
Yeah.
sutras are like devas. They all are like simultaneously active. They all are
Hmm.
coming together and they build something. So if you look at the
Okay. Okay.
sutras, the Panini Sutra, right? Like there are many
Mm.
sutras that are given, but in order to produce a word, many would come and follow. So it's actually like some simultaneity that is there in the sutras. So it's a bit like the
Mm.
lotus.
Mm.
You have the petals in all the directions. They all come
Mm.
together in the center. So it's like
Mm.
a way of a holistic thing putting together. The Western model, the systems thinking model, is that you need to have a hierarchy or something sometimes
Correct.
called causality, where is a specific order and
Ji,
a
ji, ji. Yeah.
serialness to this thing. And the first thing is the most important, the second is the less important. So you need to, this is how law is interpreted, for example, right? So we don't have a
Mm-hmm.
sutra framework for law. It's
Right,
unfortunate,
right,
but
right, right.
we're capable
Uh,
of doing that. But anyway,
mm-hmm.
this this type of sutra thinking is very compact. So you can represent a lot of very very complex imagery in complex system
Mm-hmm.
in a compact way, but you need to know how to use them. How to You need to be
Yeah,
trained
I
how.
mean, it would, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yes, and because that is where, that is what now we have to take forward, right? That it's all very good to talk about these as notions, as concepts, but how does one bring application and how does one use that to revive and realize Indian civilization once
Yeah.
again?
Yeah, it's actually a very central thing is that if you have the difference, I would say, the systems thinking and the sutra thinking is that systems thinking can do the job if if you give the system to a robot or a computer. It
Mm-hmm.
follows the
Mm-hmm.
instructions, and that is basically like
Yeah.
how you do one after the other, right? But for the sutra thinking, you need to know, you need to learn and internalize the wisdom so that you know which sutra to apply when.
Right, right, right,
So
right,
it's
right,
actually
right.
like
Mm.
you are not eliminating the human there, or you're eliminating the
Uh-huh.
intellectual process. So essentially you need to be trained and refined through various examples, through various, I would say, various activities. uh, it's all sadhana. You do the sadhana so that you
Mm-hmm.
basically get better and better, and at some point, yeah, you do things where nobody could have foretold what that
Mm-hmm.
have been.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how our sampradaya of music, for example, works. Like
Mm-hmm.
you are so internalizing this raga that at some point
Ji.
you go extempore, so brilliant mixing of all these
Mm-hmm.
things that nobody else would have foretold,
Correct,
right?
correct.
So
Right.
our way of representing knowledge is in that way, and that basically
Mm.
means the person has to be a master, like a
Mm-hmm.
Jedi master. It has to be internalizing
Right, right,
everything,
right. Yeah.
and not everybody. So essentially, we have to accept then that not everybody may be able to capable of doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there we have to say that, okay, everybody is good for something. You know, let them pick their goal. We don't have to
Sure.
do the same thing, but there are people who are capable of these things. They can be trained, do the sadhana.
Mm-hmm.
At some
Mm-hmm.
point, yeah, they will be like the supporting pillars of our civilization. They
Mm.
will be building more and more things, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you mentioned Panini, and so even in your article, you wrote that Panini's grammar is uniquely suited for, I don't know, computation and for computing the concept of infinity. So can
Not,
you?
not necessarily the concept of infinity, but just the computation itself. So if you look at
Okay, okay.
the computer science, we have the idea of formal systems and formal programming language. It's specified
Mm-hmm.
through something called the Bacchus Nauer form. It's a way of representing the grammar of a language. It's actually rightfully called Panini Bacchus Nauer form because Panini had exactly that way of
Acha. Okay.
formulating. So it's a way of like a
Mm-hmm.
very compact way of representing what are all the types of sentences that could be written in a programming language. And it's
Okay, okay.
similarly So Panini Ashtadhyayi had many computational inventions. So this is just one of it.
Okay.
There are many ideas. So encapsulation, and the many things. I'm not an expert on this, but it's like it's brilliant. A lot of things have been discovered by learning by doing, and also by sheer genius. And
Right.
so the critical thing about Panini's Ashtadhyayi and this in the context of infinity is that it's actually recursive. So this idea of recursion is really central for computer programming. So that is what people would learn in the first semester or second semester. So
Can you give us the sense? What do we mean by recursion, computationally or otherwise?
There are like standard computer science examples. So one popular thing would be the so-called towers of Hanoi. So you have 3 towers, and you have this. You need to move that from one to the other. In order to solve this, you think of the problem as a state, and that state is solved through a recursive application of a rule.
Yes.
And
Okay.
goes forward.
Right.
There are many other standard problems, like you have the so-called 8 queens. You have a chessboard, and you have to put 8 queens, so that you need to so that no queen would be queen or the mantri, what we say in Telugu, would be crossing the other pawn. So these kind of combinatorial problems can be very elegantly expressed in recursion. So essentially, computer programming would be much more elegant when you write things recursively, because then you kind of express extremely complex systems. Like you have this so-called game of life, where very complex patterns keep happening just by the application of recursive rules. And this is basically like what Panini's rules produce. So they produce extremely complex Sanskrit words through these rules, and it's the same rules. It's just recursively getting applied. So you see some brilliant notions of infinity through this application of these rules. And in fact, if you look at our standard Indian grammatical tradition, they look at this as sadhana, like the people who are experts in grammar. So the Vyakarana is so they're through the grammar, through these rules, they realize the infinite. So they realize the so it's like a different but they do that, and ultimately they are supposed to be enlightened by this.
And you write about how that endeavor is found in so many Indian things, right? Ways to express infinity. So I think you were talking about the forms of yoga, forms of rag, of taste, etc. So that part,
yeah, right. So there are 2 things here. One is basically the recursion and multiple applications of this, so that you basically get endless complexity and endless variations of this thing. That
And
is one.
infinitely blooming lotus.
And then secondly, the other important thing is that it has to be holistic. So if you look at the poses of the Surya Namaskara, right, like how you bend the human body, it kind of is a permutation of all possible combinations of the human. So it basically is like a sampling, a good sampling of the space. So I think of like in computation, so you have a space where all these states can be represented, and this is elegantly sampled, like a kind of a uniform sampling or something like that. And that is a holistic representation of this thing. And that is how music is represented. Like if you have in Carnatic music, you have these ragas, right, like the Melakarta ragas and so on, and you have the representative composition. So if you want to learn this raga, you usually learn this particular composition. So if you know how to sing it very well or play it very well, then you would play everything in that raga. So this is basically defined in such a way such that all possible things, complex things that are useful for the raga are trained. So this way of holistic representation of ideas, and also with beauty, that is a very unique Indian thing. And that is something I hopefully we would also apply for new media, social media, and so on. So because I'm terribly disappointed right now with what we have. So at some point, hopefully, I will have things which actually give some rasa when we are using them.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a dream, yeah, a good dream. There's this quote. It's called "Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande," which means as above, so below. And so when we combine this with notions of infinity, of recursiveness, you also write in the article, what's being attempted is a comprehensive model of reality,
Yeah.
right? And to understand that or to express that, we use the terms dharma and rita. So
Yes.
can you talk about these two terms? How do they relate? What should we
Yeah. So
understand from them?
yeah, I expressed this Rutam in the first essay on the cosmic
Yeah,
wheel.
yeah.
So
Mm,
Rutam basically is yeah, it's very complex, and
mm-hmm,
one way simple way to understand this is basically to think of it like a wheel, and
mm-hmm,
you it keeps rotating, right? And at the center of it is the axle, you know,
mm-hmm,
the what we sometimes say is ka and the center,
mm,
and uh, that thing is our consciousness or purusha, and the wheel is
mm,
prakriti and the jagat and
okay.
everything rotates.
Mm-hmm,
So each one of us, through our gaze, we kind of influence how the rutam
mm,
changes. So again, this particular way of looking at the universe, where the human or the participatory
observe, yeah.
conscious observation actually changes the thing. It is a very
Mm,
controversial thing in physics. There is certain models, physics models, which
sure.
say that, but we have fairly complex and very tricky things in Indian philosophy. So this
Correct,
rutam,
correct, yeah.
with the simple word, you kind of express very complex things. And what it actually says, by the observation of the jyotisha, the planets, and so we are
Mm,
trying to think ourselves, and so we are doing yoga. We are
yeah,
putting our consciousness in combination with
yeah.
the cosmic
The
consciousness.
rhythm, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that is the central idea of Rutam. So that you basically do at the very practical plane, you do things which are seasonal. So what is good for a good season
Correct.
or a good time, do that at that time. Don't do that in a different time. So that
Yeah.
is a very dumb way to express it. But everything has a specific time, and it has to be tallied with the cosmos and so on. So that is the Rutam. But the sense of Rutam, if you really get it, then you are a Rishi. That not everybody would
Mm,
notice. So good
okay.
at it,
Mm,
but you can at least follow them, right? Like what somebody
mm,
is good at it,
mm,
you just follow that. And dharma is
mm-hmm.
basically what is produced when
With
this
this as the endeavor.
this is the yeah. So dharma can
Uh,
is very manifold. It changes at for each
mm,
person, each
mm-hmm.
context, because everybody's context is different, right? So you basically have to kind of interpret this thing according to the context, but then sync to
Ji.
that universal thing.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
this is where also dharma is not the same as religion, because you cannot just have unique set of rules.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so yeah, and then we have another very complex thing, which is satyam, which is
Mm,
uh, inexpressible. So you cannot just say it's truth or it is fact or anything like that. It is actually, I look at it as the unchanging, something that which doesn't have any change.
mm,
Everything else has
mm-hmm,
some type
mm-hmm.
of a change. Even the rutam would change, right? Like with seasons and so on. But what is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
which doesn't change at all? Okay, is there
Mm,
anything like that? You can also dispute. You can say that there is nothing that is unchanging.
mm,
Everything is changing.
mm-hmm,
Buddhists, for example, have that kind of an argument. So
mm,
essentially, that is the satyam, and these are the yeah. I think Shivkumar actually wrote a great essay on this. I didn't
mm-hmm.
read. But he
Ruta and Dharma, right?
yeah, so
It's
these
titled some,
these
yeah.
ideas would be the defining thing. But I would just recommend everyone, like anybody who is
Mm-hmm.
listening to our conversation, don't read my article. Just read some nice poetry or some nice stories from India. There you get the sense of it much better. And
Right.
yeah.
So Saundarya, that is, I think, then because your article also then eventually moves to the concept of Saundarya. So is that what you're recommending, that people have different ways of engaging with the Saundarya of it all?
Right. Your voice is a little bit breaking because perhaps we are 2 hours long, the conversation. Um,
That shouldn't be a factor. Just
okay.
hold on.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Saundarya Drishti or the aesthetic
Yeah.
vision, it's not something that you get it, right? You cannot obtain it just by yeah by following some recipe or something. Um, so yeah, I said in my article that we need to have something called sahridiyata. So that way of
Sahridaya, yeah.
that way of appreciating the beauty by saying that, okay, we are all joined together at the heart level, like we are all, in the same conscious experience. So what the existentialists would say, we share existence, at least at that level. If you have that open mind, then you can appreciate the beauty and the good in many cultures. So not just in our own culture,
Mm.
you know. I mean, I live here in Europe and I speak many other languages, and I have a great regard for all these other cultures. So I hope to be Sahridiya when I
Yeah.
look at these other types of
Mm.
music or other types of art. And
Yeah.
hopefully, we will have some Sahridiyas who also look at our civilization, the Indian civilization, and they are able to, yeah, borrow the right things from us. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Just before we conclude, I wanted to get your view on this quote by Shri Aurobindo. And when I read this quote, it seemed to evoke a lot of these things that we've just talked about. So he said that the human mind, in its progress, marches knowledge to knowledge,
Mm.
renews and enlarges previous knowledge, often obscured or overlaid, seizes on old imperfect clues, and is led by them to newer discoveries, which I think it basically captures what has been the Indian endeavor, that is Indian history actually, that is our past and hopefully our future. That
Yeah.
by accretion we are this infinitely blooming lotus, and hopefully we keep blooming. That would be the
Yeah, it's a great quote, and hopefully, yeah, we will not lose sight of it because,
yeah.
yeah, with the day-to-day lives and whatever obligations
Mhm.
people have, essentially we are running a program for our life, which
Mhm.
is written by somebody else. It's not our life
Yeah.
actually, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So at some point we have to take that. Be a yajamana and do the yajna, right? Like we have to do
Yes. Yeah.
so this is the thing, yajna is eternally creative. So a new universe is born
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm.
So this
Yeah.
is also again yajna itself, like the yajnana yajnam ajayanta devaha, right? That is the ayajanta devaha. This quote also says it's a recursive thing that the devas always
Mm.
come together, do the
Mm.
yajna through the yajna. So it's like
Correct.
through
Correct.
the
Yeah.
yajna,
Yeah.
they do the yajna and ultimately get the yajna out of it. So it's
Yes.
essentially
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
way of, yeah. So what we need for that is essentially, firstly, we need to have the idea that we are part of a bigger picture, and we need to
Hmm.
have the sense of obligation for, our ancestors and our nature and our context. And once we feel that, and also, there's a rishis, the scholarly tradition what we have. So once we feel that, then we will do our little bit to contribute to that, and then somebody else will do some other bit, and
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. But this thing needs to have that, yeah, that sense of duty, that it is actually, what is turning the universe forward. So this yajna
Hmm.
is what is
Hmm.
actually responsible for for bringing the future forward. So that is actually the karma
Yes. Yeah.
siddhanta, right? Like that is, it's in our hands to
Mm.
shape the future. So that
Mm.
to realize would be, the goal of education generally in India. But
Yeah. Yes.
is it the case now? I don't know. Yeah, but let's see.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah, at some point that would be there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great, great, Kiran. Thank you. This was, of course, for me, amazing. And shout out to our mutual friend, Abhivardhan in this thing. It's from him that I was able to reach you. So
Yeah, it's
it
nice
was
talking to
lovely,
you.
lovely to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not intellectual or anything, but I had a great
Yeah.
conversation, and we
Same
would
here. Yeah.
obviously, yeah, learn a lot through each other, and also by constant practice, right? Like
Yeah.
finding something.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye. Namaste.
Bye. Bye.